Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this episode of BrainDeath, I'd like to take a moment to mention something. In this episode, we will be discussing a video from a YouTube creator. Due to the nature of the recording and to help with the podcast itself, the audio from the upload will be heard, albeit at a lower volume than Josh and I are recording at. However, unlike our previous episode on Bitter Lake and our upcoming episode on an arguably legendary piece of furry animation, we will not be providing a picture-in-picture view of this video. What we will do is provide a link to his upload in the description of the podcast itself. This is for one simple reason. We would unironically like you to go watch this creator's original upload. We feel that this particular creator should receive the credit he rightfully deserves for this piece, and we wanted to minimize any negative impact on this. Therefore, we feel it would be unfair to show the video itself, especially in its entirety. Please, go watch the original upload and give this creator the support he deserves. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Turn off that pesky ad block. 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 Turn off that pesky ad block.
What's up, folks? It's BrainDeath.
What to do?
The autistic duo back at it again, completely unprovoked.
It's your boy Bullets back at it again with the autistic videos.
Oh my god. This one actually is less autistic than most of the shit that we watch, to be fair. This is more analyzing autism on a level that I could only hope to fucking ever achieve.
From what I've heard of this video and everyone that has already seen it, because this is my first time watching it, this is actually a really in-depth and relatively fair shakedown of the fandom in general. And Lord knows there's plenty of them, plenty of videos anyways on YouTube that talk about the fandom, but they tend to be either inaccurate or biased on the side of either making furries look good or just ragging on them, like LOL furfags, you know?
Well,
Am I right?
and one of the things that kind of sets this video apart, I consider myself somewhat of a furry fandom historian. But realistically, like, watching this made me realize that a lot of my knowledge hard stops at like the early fucking 90s when it actually became a term. This video literally starts from the very beginning, like the seeds that were planted that grew into the gnarled poisonous fruit-bearing tree that is our fandom.
That one that popped up in Eden, you know?
Yeah.
That one.
I mean, there was a snake involved in that, so. Okay, so what were you saying?
I was just saying this one goes back as far as like the early 60s from what I can tell, and that is definitely farther back than anybody else has cared to go.
This actually starts post-war, technically. So, for those of you who aren't aware of what the fuck I'm talking about, there's a guy that I've been following on YouTube for probably a year at this point, named Frederick Knudsen. And I originally found him through his breakdown of Darkside Phil. It's a little show called Down the Rabbit Hole.
And what a little show it is.
This guy, I don't know how the fuck he does his research, but holy fuck, it is impressive, the level of research this guy does on the topic. And he I think I turned you onto it, Bullets, with the Rajneeshpuram video he did.
I actually sent you that. You got me hooked on this channel with another video. I don't remember which one it was. And I'd have to go dig through his stuff to be able to tell you which one it was. Maybe I can do that later at some point after we finished watching this. But you sent me a link to one of his videos, and I went and binge-watched pretty much every single one that caught my interest, which was nearly all of them.
Yeah. He does focus on, like, weird internet shit. Like, he's got a video up next about Noah Antweiler, also known as the Spoonie One. And that is a 37-minute, 52-second breakdown of everything that made Noah popular and everything that caused his downfall. And he discusses these, for lack of a better term, controversial people and topics and shit in a very, very middle-of-the-line manner. Like, literally just...
He's extremely candid, if you will.
Yeah.
He's not only extremely candid, he's also very in-depth. Nobody would accuse him of being unfair,
Yeah.
I think, aside from perhaps the people or the people involved with the phenomena that he discusses.
Yeah, exactly. Which is definitely the case with this video, even though it may not seem like the case, it really is. It's just that Furry is a goat fuck. So... So, yeah, hearkening back to the original concept of this podcast, all of, 4 episodes ago? I have seen this video, Josh has not. And we just kind of decided on a whim to record it for an episode. So, this ought to be interesting, to say the least. We're going to watch the video, make a little bit of commentary, and discuss it afterwards. So let's get into it.
In recent years, the term furry has come to be associated with a
That
group whose
fucking
identity and affiliations remain mostly vague. While
What,
many
the group
people
photo?
readily
Yeah.
accept the moniker of furry, used as both a noun and adjective, there appears to be little to no unifying body nor statement of ideals that defines them. Still, the artwork that pervades this group is of a definitively cartoonish style,
Oh,
often
Cocodope.
using anime and manga.
I like how he uses another YouTuber's
and
fucking
animated
art.
television shows from the
Yeah.
80s and 90s for influences.
Of course he knows who Cocodope is.
They are frequently
Of course.
found in other fandoms, adapting their furry interests.
Hey,
to
at least
whatever
he's
other fandom
including
or
the credits.
activity in which they are involved.
Oh, God,
Furry
yeah.
avatars are especially common on forums and social media sites. So what are furries?
Everywhere, that's what.
By the 1940s, Walt Disney Productions Limited had not only become incredibly
You were right.
but also
40s.
ubiquitous in
Post-war,
American culture.
motherfucker?
Throughout the 1930s, their movies and animated shorts had reached national popularity, and after
Technically,
American
it could have been
World
during the
II,
war.
they were
Just
commissioned
said 40s.
extensively to produce widely viewed propaganda films and training animations for the military.
Definitely during the
Less
war,
known for their
yeah.
anthropomorphized animals
Anthropomorphic
directed
ducks
towards
throwing
audiences,
shit at Hitler.
and
Yeah, there we go.
cartoonish, rounded style
I wonder if we could
target
find that and
demographic
watch
became
it.
a standard for artists working on these sorts of
There
characters.
is a Donald
Style
Duck
was
episode
based
where
on
he's
similar
in Nazi Germany.
depictions of animals, starting in the
That is
But it's like a-
fantastic.
It's like a farmyard, and it's ran by a bunch of fascist
But as this was
ducks.
occurring, post-war countercultural
So, Animal
movements were
Farm.
taking notice of the trend.
An Animal Farm, but fascist
Underground
edition,
comic
yes.
scene, stylized with an X, which often utilized a similar style to Disney's
Cocaine!
friendly cartoons.
Cocaína
by
kamika.
putting original characters into various adult situations, almost always involving violence, drugs, sex,
Oh
or
my
a combination
God.
of the three. These would be printed and distributed by independent publishers, allowing them to avoid the content guidelines of traditional publications. The funny animals were not
I can't
exempt
see
from
turning
this
a
treatment, and
perfectly
they would
good frog
occasionally
into
make
a prince.
appearances. One of these independent works, however, reached popularity beyond that of its contemporaries. A comic strip called Fritz the Cat, which began printing
Oh,
in
Fritz the Cat.
1965. It depicted the eponymous anthropomorphic
This little
character,
nigga.
a disillusioned
Fritz the
and
Cat
depressed
becomes a
philanderer
drug
in a
addict.
city populated by other
Fritz the
human
Cat
animals.
rapes somebody.
This character proved so popular that
Fritz the
an
Cat
8-minute
gets a
long
gun.
animated movie was created based on the intellectual
I
property
still want to
of
watch
the
that fucking movie. I'm surprised I haven't seen it yet.
return on investment.
Dude, same.
Inspired in part
To be
by
fair,
Fritz
it's
the
kind of
Cat,
hard to find.
a project called Voodie was proposed by a pair of professional
Oh, this
cartoonists.
Voodie segment.
They explained their logic and plans in a proposal which they printed on February 29, 1976. Quote, Ken Fletcher and I, Reed Walker, have been talking about
Is
this
this
for
the
a
first
long time, and we
furry
feel that
civil
comics
rights
today,
movement?
both over
Ban
and
all
underground,
humans?
are entirely too serious. So, Voodie is being created as a showplace for irresponsible silliness. And since mass audiences aren't as tolerant of silliness as artists themselves tend to be, we decided to make it an amateur press association rather than a magazine. Do you have, or could you create for us, a page or two of irresponsibly silly stuff which nobody else would have the patience to look at, preferably without human characters? You see, the whole point of funny animal fandom, incorporating funny vegetables, funny minerals, and funny machines fandoms, is that humans
Funny
in general
machines
are too
fandom.
serious. They get puffed up and self-important and full
So
of
the
this
mech
insatiable
furries
desire
were a
for
thing,
impact
like-
and significance. Human characters
Plain
are
Sonos
self-righteous, know all the
predate
answers,
you,
and are ready to
perfect scum.
than everyone else. We don't want all that seriousness here. There's already enough everywhere else. Well, anyways, we'd like to get funny animals back to the status they deserve, at least among fellow cartoonists. If you're like
By
us,
drawing
you owe
porn
funny
of
animals
them.
quite a lot for the part they've
This
probably
literally
played in
is
your
like
development as an artist.
A proto-recruitment letter for furries, honestly. If you had to write a recruitment letter for the fandom, it would look like that.
To the official editor,
Right.
sometimes called a central mailer or something.
Except now there would be a trigender pyrofox as the character at the top.
Oh my god. You know, it's funny you mention that because that gets... Wait till you see the,
We'd like Voodie to be a
Wait till you see the
NASCAR
first
level
furry
drawing
mascot.
dominated by cartoon art of all
Oh,
kinds,
no.
with some personal news and mailing comments from the members. A place where you can just wig out without having to think about the usual market considerations. No
Wig out,
censorship,
isn't that
mixed
like some
media,
sort of offensive
offset,
term
Vimeo,
these days?
Ditto, silkscreen,
We need to,
block print, silly putty, whatever you can think of.
we need
No
to ban
requirements
this
except that you
publication.
keep those serious people as much out of it as possible. Humans
I mean,
are
I
okay,
know they
but
did it in
only
the
when they're funny
1960s,
animals,
but,
too. Sex and
you know,
violence is okay,
that doesn't
as long
matter.
as it's not human sex and violence. Unquote. The artistic demands for Voodie would be high, requesting work only from people whom they termed skilled cartoonists.
Oh my
The first
god.
issue would be
The
sent
fucking...
created in
Did you
April
see
of
the little
1966,
transgender dude in
though
the corner?
utilizing an APA distribution structure
No.
for a visual medium hadn't been practiced before. Advancements in photocopying technology meant that artists could make copies of their work both easier
Oh,
and
fuck.
cheaper
We'll have to
than
go
ever
back so I
before.
can show you
It
that
proved a
later.
remarkable success among those admitted.
Make a
but
note
the
of it.
exclusivity
Will
meant
do.
that many were unable to receive their own copies. But Voodie gave an outlet to some of those artists who had a greater interest in funny animals, and soon that enthusiasm would spread.
We sure could use more of them cartoons.
In the early 1970s,
Wow,
a man
this
named
nigga.
Mark Merlino had begun a tradition of collecting and showing bootlegged television shows. at
I'm
science
pretty
fiction
sure
conventions
I
in
see
Italy.
guys like this,
One night,
like,
at the first
still
Lost
walking
Con
around the
convention
fucking
in Los
conventions.
Angeles in 1975, he performed a screening which
Yeah,
included
which is
a number
probably a
of
bigger
Japanese
deterrent to
animated
parents
shows
with children than all the
aired on
people in
television
costumes.
stations in Hawaii. The giant robot shows proved especially popular.
One thing you'll
The
notice
interest was
about
so
all
great
these,
that he
like,
founded a monthly club
founding
devoted to
guys,
screening Japanese
they
animation,
all
which was
look
named
like they
Cartoon
touch
/
kids.
Fantasy Organization, or CFO. At first, they only had access to bootlegs, but soon they created.
So they were like our founding fathers, except their hair isn't a powdered wig; it's a greasy installation upon their body.
High-quality
Yes.
videotapes of the newest Japanese animated shows. Many of these enthusiasts who were attracted to Japanese animation had overlapping interests in the funny animal fandom, perhaps in part because of the frequency of characters with animal-like visual traits. This was likely encouraged by Merlino, who was a funny animal fan himself and would even design a funny animal character to serve as the group's mascot.
There you
Some
go.
members would create stop-motion animation featuring
It's
Furry
a sparkle
to serve as
dog, but a cat.
phone meetings.
Look
They
at
also
this
had
horrifying
interest in spreading
shit.
Japanese animation to the rest
Is that
of
a
America,
cat with,
and
like,
increasing
alien
its
antenna?
popularity
Yes.
domestically.
Now I know where that character thing comes from.
Smaller clubs
Yep.
in cities around the country, though the two major ones would be the original in Los
83.
Angeles and another in New York City, with both
God, that
animation
art
and
screams 83 too.
as the CFO was growing, small, funny, animal-focused independent...
Is that anti-Semitic? Is that a yarmulke and a Jew nose? My God.
They would feature both visual art and writing, but the former proved much more popular and would soon come to dominate them, especially as photocopying grew to be cheaper, more accessible, and
Why
of
white?
better
Oh,
quality.
that sounds like
Unlike
today.
IPAs, these zines were available to the public, not only the contributing artists, and they helped strengthen interest in the fandom as they grew more prolific at the outset of the 80s. The quality of the art would vary.
I wonder
greatly,
what's in
with
that
works
comic.
submitted by both professionals and amateurs of all skill levels.
Tales of a Rabbit Revolutionary.
Cartoonish
Does he
style.
attack trash
Here,
cans?
The overlap between the anime and funny animal fandoms would become
Oh my
apparent,
God.
with much of the visual art featuring
Oh,
style choices and
this
design
hurts.
clearly influenced
What,
by
1980?
animation. While no matter
That's some
1981?
SS looking
it's likely
shit.
that a majority of these zines include pornography of funny animal characters, and some zines consisted primarily of this sort of content, though the ratio
Wow.
of pornographic to non-pornographic artwork varied
Yeah,
widely
that's
between
literally
groups.
just like straight up
Some
porn.
of these zines
Yeah.
would grow even more specific in
Yeah.
their targeted content, focusing on niche groups within an already small fandom. Recognizing their reach, the CFO would soon begin advertising in these zines, offering discounts for members at science fiction convention booths if they showed their membership card. But the CFO was not the only group forming around funny animals. In 1980, an artist named Steve Galati
You weren't kidding.
at the World Science Fiction Convention held in Boston that year, where he submitted artwork of his anthropomorphic
Nigga looks like he
character
owns
Irma
3
Irma.
ice cream
A
vans.
number of the attendees enjoyed his artwork and began speaking
All with
him,
pull-down
forming a small
windows.
group around him and discussing funny animals. He would continue to print artwork of Irma Felna and sell these at conventions, quickly gathering people around him each time. These interested parties would later meet at other conventions in what came to be known
See, I
as
was gonna
Normie,
laugh at like the
Galati,
quality of some of that
share
artwork,
their
but the fact is I've seen like officially licensed Star Wars comics that have artwork that's that bad, so
Hey, that was just the,
And to meet this demand, Galati created Albedo Anthropomorphics,
We-
a comic anthology devoted to a more serious treatment.
We
of
went
funny
from the
animals
Mona
in
Lisa to
1983.
this.
Perhaps most notably,
I don't
in
think we can give the
1982,
Japanese
would
any
publish
shit.
The first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo, now internationally recognized intellectual property. Around this time, bulletin board systems, or BBSs, were beginning to grow in popularity. Acting as an early version of the internet, these message boards allowed users to share files and information, as well as participate in text chat over a phone line, with the correct programs and hardware. Though the price of computers and the technical knowledge required to use them stymied their proliferation.
Does this say treasure brought back by the Crusaders? What is this?
Already shared many members with geek culture. One board in particular.
Is it any surprise that the furry fandom, like even back then, was just filled with people who sat in their bedrooms playing on computers?
This BBS and others like it would help funny animal fans connect and share their interests, growing the fandom considerably and allowing them to coordinate and meet at conventions much easier. But soon...
God, what was the proto-furry? Somebody who sat around in an Egyptian tomb by himself painting the murals on the walls.
At science fiction conventions, it was common
I love you,
practice for
ISIS.
people to host small
Oh, wait,
parties
shit.
in their hotel rooms, often limited to artists who were presenting work at the convention.
Tear down this ancient fur faggotry.
At WesterCon, some attendees offered Mark Merlino and his partner Rod O'Reilly their room at the Red Lion Inn to use for a party, where they featured a special copy of the then extremely rare Animalympics TV special with other congoers. It was
Dude,
around this time
That's
that
actually
the
wicked.
fandom was
Shit, right?
disseminated. The Furry fandom. Mark Merlino at a convention panel
I want to find that video. I know someone I want to send it to.
I love how they keep using the same photo of Mark Molino. Like, apparently this is the only one ever taken of him ever.
Clubhouse. These are people who collected plush animals.
And if this is it, I can understand why.
For any- okay. And this guy who called himself Dr. Pepper, this fan who really wasn't a furry to speak of.
By the way, what he just said there was
He didn't mind them.
the term furry was actually coined by a plushophile.
Suggested that we were
No kidding.
and it just kind of stuck.
Other people give alternative accounts of its inception, however, and no definitive origin has been discovered.
Yeah, I
Its
would
word
give an
can be used
alternate,
both as a
like,
noun and an adjective
reality
to describe
answer
groups
if
within the fandom
I
and
knew
the
the term had been
art course
coined by a
By a
plushophile.
plushophile, yeah.
By the following year, room parties based on furry interests would become a regular occurrence at conventions.
Pay
became
attention to this
known
part.
As furry parties. What exactly occurred at these parties is not documented, but the promotional material was suggestive. One flyer from RoseCon in 1988 depicts a naked anthropomorphic character saying, "No ma'am, the morality and fandom party is next door." Other promotional material was often of a similarly risque nature. Eventually,
Yeah, I caught bits of this a while ago.
contained them, and there was a belief that the fandom had grown large enough that the room parties could be turned into a convention. And so, to test
Whew.
this theory, Merlino
Whew,
and
lad.
Riley reserved space with the Holiday Inn in Costa Mesa, California, to hold what they named Conference Zero. The convention was sparse, with basic events and nothing resembling a celebrity guest. Though only 65 people arrived, it was enough for the organizers to consider it a success, and they took special note of the
65
fact that
people
2
showed up.
dressed up as anthropomorphic animals,
And that's a success.
including one in leather fetish gear.
Okay, 2 fursuiters showed up, and 1 was wearing this.
I mean, to be fair, that actually looks better than probably about 60% of the suits I see walking around now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, but literally 50% of the fur fags at this convention were in fetish gear.
Among those who read the Around this time, another important
Well,
interpersonal
fursuiters, let me put it that way. Which, to be fair, the ratio has not changed all that much.
In the 80s,
If you count every damn canine with a harness on their character, then yeah.
Pastime for computer users, acting as
We all know what that harness is for. You're not fooling anybody.
Similar to a text-based adventure game.
You're not
Users were
tugging
able to change
sleds
the
with
world
that
in ways
shit.
Other players could experience while also communicating through text. They connected through the internet, which was becoming more accessible around this time, using a protocol called Telnet. Mux proved to be a popular variant of MUD,
Oh no,
especially
Mux.
for role players, due to the way that they were structured. They typically did not feature combat, but instead focused on building and interaction. End side note.
Interaction.
In 1990, a MUC specifically for furries was created, which they named Furry
Furry
MUC.
Muck.
While this was the first furry-centered one, more were
Okay,
created.
I'm pretty curious about this.
They soon proved to be a popular method for furries to communicate and interact regularly with one another, even over great distances. Then, in December, a Usenet board specifically for furries was created, with a few others being made later under different tags. Here, furries were able to stay current with developments in the community.
Alt.music.jethro
It quickly became a central part of the
80s
furry
as
community, with many major members participating. Throughout the 90s, many smaller fan gatherings called fur meets would begin to
Invented
form as well,
Fur Meet,
sometimes with
97.
more than
Woo!
1,000 people.
MFM.
Numbers continued to grow into the hundreds. The problems with such a large
Autistic
population
as
appeared
fuck
first
even
in the
back
early
then.
1990s. Mark Merlino describes these issues.
Now, to whip this back around to conventions, one of the things we had to deal with, which helps once you're at a hotel for more than 1 year, was there were people who would sabotage the convention any way they could. And the original way is they would try to tell people, they'd call up the hotel anonymously and say, they're selling bootleg videotapes. And we actually had to deal with police who came to the convention to go through the dealer's room looking for people selling bootleg videotapes.
Those poor cops.
Then after that it was
That's
this
so
is a
douchey,
convention
though.
of pedophiles. There are people selling, illegal underage art, and photos and movies and such in there, and you shut the convention down.
Yes, so 4chan was a way in one shape or form well before the true rise of the internet ever existed. 4chan is just an avenue of them.
World Wide Web. This network allowed people
4chan is
to
just a
create their own
symptom.
websites where they could host text and images. In an effort to give the fandom an easier way to share artwork, a man named Brian W. Anton opened his private image
VCL.
hosting site, the Valence Central
Which is how
Library,
I got
to
my
allow
start
others to
in the
upload their
fandom.
own works. Soon after,
I got it
was
through
open.
VCL and
Art
transfer.
more accessible while also allowing for networking. Then, in
Completely
1996,
different connotation
a new
these
virtual
days.
world was made available that catered specifically to
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Furcadia.
I wonder if that website's still running.
Easily downloaded and run
Its
on a
content
PC,
has
and
shifted.
featured a colorful isometric graphic
Just like, just like their users.
making it far more accessible than the text-based mucks. According to an interview with some of the game's producers, the population tripled yearly for the first 5 years it was available.
Is this like
to the
Wolf
public.
Home sort of
The
shit?
proliferation
This
of
is
these
Furcadia,
online
dude.
Resources meant that, for a large portion of furries, the zines that had been so popular through the 80s were outmoded. For a time, the increased connectivity
That's not
allowed
a fetish
furries to
comic at
discover
all.
new zines and subscribe to them, but eventually, increasing internet speeds
Nor
made it
is
easier
that.
to upload higher quality images online.
I mean,
All of
I don't
these
know. That
factors
one
together
doesn't
saw
look
a
bad.
rapid
What is that
exponential
hand,
increase
though?
in people referring to
What is
themselves
that
as
face?
furry, but with
What is all of
increasing size
that?
came the inevitable problems that fandoms face, and they would be extreme.
Extreme.
Oh no, it's hard, Balto.
After the first year of conference, each successive convention would grow by more than 100 every year throughout the 1990s. However, as the crowd grew, the convention gained more and more of a reputation for wildness and eroticism beyond only the selling of pornography. One man, by the name of Ed Klein, released an open letter to Mark Merlino on the Furry Usenet board on
Ed's
February
ruining
8th,
everything.
1997, illustrating just how extreme the issue
We wouldn't
had
have it
grown
any
at
other
the
way.
conference. He opens.
This is pretty crazy, though.
Mark,
I'm gonna be
this
quiet for
letter
this.
is in regards to a serious problem that we encountered at Conference 8. I direct this letter at you personally because I assume you are still in charge and responsible for the convention in general. I say I assume because certain matters have made me question your authority regarding the running of this con. Mark, pay very close attention to what you're reading. I do not want any misunderstandings. Klein goes on to describe several incidents while he was at the convention.
Keep in mind, this is
On
in like the
Thursday,
early
day of
to
my
mid
arrival, on our way
90s.
to get something to eat at the hotel
Late
coffee shop,
90s.
we watched two young men deliberately waiting for what we saw to be mundanes see them, and proceed to deep-throat each other in a rather blatant manner in the hotel lobby, obviously getting a kick out of offending people. This went on for the period of time it took us to get across the lobby and into the coffee shop. They were still there when we left. Besides that, what the hell was one of your security doing walking around in drag? What's that got to do with the so-called premise of the convention, along with
That is
not aiding
so
in the
problematic.
people would be feeling in approaching security?
Did you just say they were walking around in drag? That is offensive. Do not use that
Has
term.
now become infamous in the furry fandom and was soon corroborated by other Usenet posters.
This,
There
though.
was a situation in an elevator Saturday evening when I was taking some important guests back to my room for business. We were discussing said business in the elevator on our way up to the room when one of the gentlemen with me leaned back against the wall, as most people do, when he found his side and pants covered in semen. Some diseased bottom feeder couldn't contain himself and squirted all over the wall. He then discusses his concerns with the direction of the convention. Quote, "When did you decide to make this convention something other than anthropomorphic? What are you going to do about this lunatic fringe that is seeping into the convention? And understand this, I don't care whether they're alternative lifestylists or otherwise, or if they make love to their pets, or any other preference. That's not what I'm addressing. What are you going to do about the people who aren't interested in attending this convention for its intended purposes?" We overheard others on more than one occasion ask, "What's a furry?" and received the answer, "I don't know, I'm just here for the parties and sex." What are you going to do about these same people who are going about methodically ruining the reputations of the alternative lifestylists as well? And if you don't think there's a problem with this, you're not looking in the right places. Get your head out of your ass and clean up your fucking act. I'm not the only one that's pissed about this. He goes on to indict Mark Merlino for driving out the old regular attendees, but
This kind of thing is what Kage grew up with, and this kind of thing is why he's so draconian
Oh
at
my god.
Anthrocon, and a
I
lot
mean-
of furries don't fucking understand that at all.
Exactly, like, this kind of shit right here
similar interests for the benefit of charity.
completely
More than a queer auction. Kishma offered to do a lap dance as Toshta, her zebra dancer, to the highest bidder. If she was offering this to a furry audience, she probably would have brought the house down. Instead, she got crickets. Know what this means, Mark? She went for $28. And yet, some little cretin in tight black shorts offering veiled sex went for $180. In fact, all those offering
exactly though.
Of the pet sold for
I had to pause to let that play out because that was a very interesting segment to me.
You're lucky it wasn't shut down. There was also
the
people with cameras were attending.
The thing you said about Kage though, exactly. You know, this
Do you have it paused?
No, I don't.
These sentiments were a demonstration of a concern and...
Where'd you pause it? Let's go back to that real quick, because there's some really important shit to unpack in that.
What he said there was basically... This convention held an auction, alright? It was basically prostitution, you know, as described in the letter. Okay. He said that a furry who had a supposedly popular zebra character offered a lap dance to the winner as her character, okay? And she got $28 as the winning bid. And another person, I'm assuming a male by the description, went for $180. Okay, let's do a little math here. 180 divided by 28. Okay, that is 6.5 times what the furry went for. Basically, what he is saying here is that the audience at the furry conventions was no longer interested in the furry aspect nearly as much as they were the LGBT aspect.
I was going to say that doesn't mean, and this is something we can go into more when we start talking about the video after we finish, but that doesn't necessarily say that at all. That tells me that the audience is overwhelmingly gay and male, unless it was 50% women, 50% male.
Which I mean, let's be fair, there's no fucking way.
Yeah, it's unlikely.
I mean, we don't even
back
get those.
Then.
Yeah, we don't even get those numbers today. So,
but yeah, it just tells me they're overwhelmingly gay. I bet if it was a male who was offering that lap dance or whatever as the character, probably dressed in a certain attire, it would have gone for more than any of the bids for people in just pretty much slutty clothing. But what got me was that bit. Did you catch that bit about their pets? What was he talking about? Was he meaning that literally? Because
well,
it sounds like it
what
was.
This was it was called a pet auction. Basically a slave auction, a willing slave auction held at the convention. Basically, you put yourself up for bid, and the winning bidder gets to tell you what they want to do, or they can. All this shit is can be arranged, but it's basically a prostitution auction.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what that is.
So,
it's not only illegal, it's degenerate as fuck, but hey. I mean, passing judgment is for right-wing Nazis, so I shouldn't do it. I can't still tell people what is fucking illegal. We'll pick up where it left off, I guess, unless you had something else to add.
No, I thought it was, for some reason, that particular little section caught me as very interesting because, like I said, to me, it seemed that there was less of a focus on the furry aspect as much as there was the sexualized aspect, even back in, the first convention days.
Literally one of the proto conventions were having the whole debate about sexuality in the fandom. It appears that the fandom has always been incredibly sexual in nature.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, and like he was saying, it spawned from these comics that had sex in them. They had, the violence and everything. But anyway, yeah, that little section there just really kind of grabbed me, tickled my tism, so to speak.
Same. I actually heard that segment a little earlier when we were fucking around trying to get things working.
Specifically to smear the fandom, a fear spurred by a general desire for the fandom to be accepted by those from without. These sentiments were a demonstration of a concern and frustration that had been building in the furry fandom for some time, and soon they would culminate.
I love how that literally was about them giving birth and Balto fucking
beating Steel with his own
baby. Yeah.
In 1998, a woman named Charlotte Trotman wrote a public letter online under the name Squee Rat, entitled "This Sordid Little Business,"
and here
as the Furry
we
Manifesto, and it expanded upon Ed Klein's letter to apply it to the greater furry fandom. She opened with a strong indictment. Quote, "I remember when being a pervert was a bad thing. If you were warped, you tried to hide it, and good for you if you did. If you were going to polish your rod to autopsy photos or bugger a Shetland pony, you did it in the privacy of your own sick, sad home. No one else, especially not me, had to know, and that was great. The best part
This is some burn fur shit, isn't it?
And inform the neighborhood via midnight megaphone that being urinated on got you hot, you would be told in no uncertain terms how very diseased you were. Most people I know don't have too much trouble distinguishing between a lifestyle choice and a warning sign. Yep, in many parts of the world, the idea of making love to Andy Panda is still regarded as somewhat misguided.
Somewhat.
Most parts, that is, except furry fandom. I don't know what the hell happened here." Apparently out of ignorance, she goes on to misattribute the origins of the fandom as entirely non-sexual. Quote, "To me, and a lot of other people, furry simply means a fondness for animal-human combinations in art, movies, books, whatever. If you're biased towards Redwall novels, have a soft spot for anime cat girls, or can't drag yourself away from The Secret of Nim, chances are excellent that you're at least slightly fur-inclined. That's pretty cool by me. The simple definition
And she's right.
is what started
Exactly.
furry fandom in the first place.
It's just that 95% of those people also like to the idea of fucking animal people.
Quote, "The most obvious one so far would be suspicions of bestiality.
Suspicions.
This wouldn't be a problem if the furs that did it weren't so damn proud of it. For those of you that were out sick that day in sex ed class, don't fuck
about a second
pets.
ahead of me.
Raping Fido is a 100% bad idea. You're making us all look bad, goddammit." Her second group of interest was also...
It's not a bad idea, it's a wrong idea.
As we descend
Wrong
just a
thing.
step deeper into hell, we stumble across the path.
But literally, though.
That's shorthand for, "I find this Miko doll intensely erotic." These are the people
My
who use
problem with this
FAO
letter,
as a singles bar.
um,
I don't know who decided
yeah,
that this
people
was a
who
valid
fuck their
excuse for a
dogs are
sex
bad,
act,
but those
probably
goddamn
still within
plushophiles.
the You don't have to
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself. I'm like, wow.
Dysfunction, the very concept of plush
Maybe a little bit
furry
skewed.
lifestylers. Quote, "Lee, we've got us some self-righteous little pokers down here. You see, just drawing cartoon animals or enjoying Watership Down doesn't make you a furry. No, you're not good enough. You're not a furry if it's just a hobby. If you don't think you're the astrally projected soul of a wolf trapped in a human body, or you don't answer the phone with a meow, you're not a furry. Yup, don't you feel terribly inferior now? Christ on a fire engine, what some people will try and force on you." Next.
No, I feel like an Aryan god.
Quote, "There are no werewolves. Anyone who claims to turn into a giant dog at the whim of a celestial body should be mercilessly ostracized and laughed at with maximum cruelty."
You probably will.
Her penultimate target, perplexingly, was vegans, using a naturalistic
Actually, no, I take that back.
to decry their practices. Quote,
I take that
"For those
back,
of you who
Nugger.
don't live in California, that's the total shunning of all animal products. No eggs, no leather, no beef, no fish,
And if
no
you
petting
think the
baby seals until their
plushophiles were
skulls are
bad,
soft and
fucking
Wait till you hear about
Beyond
vegans.
my comprehension, this sort of self-denial is supposed to put you more in touch with your
I bet you this
furriness.
person voted
God
for
knows
Trump.
how. I've never seen a pride of lions abandon a mule
No,
cart
did you
to
see that
chase down
character?
a fleeing herd of garden burgers. Animals have a strange way of mutilating
I'm
other animals.
guessing they didn't.
That's nature. Welcome to it. And there's nothing more furry and natural than gnawing some flesh, kids. Human beings are omnivorous, and that means meat. If you don't believe me, fetch yourself a mirror and smile. See those pointy things? Canines. So enough with the tofu and bean sprouts, your spirit animals are laughing at you. The last was shorter, taunting those who ardently wanted to be animals themselves. Numerous
I mean,
people
deer
in
have
furry
quote-unquote
communities brought their own
canines as
beliefs,
well, but...
concerns, and
hey,
frustrations
I'll let the girl rant.
brought from posts. These concerns were founded in the scattered news stories that were beginning to appear about the furry fandom during the 90s, often showcasing their unconventional sexual habits.
Many of those attending the conference here told us that being furry
90s
is
is
just innocent
fuck.
child's play. Adults pretending to be
It
kids.
hurts.
A lot of what goes on here is undeniably adult-oriented.
It's like,
and
it's
not
like Fox
friendly.
Mulder's Down syndrome cousin.
At
Oh,
the pet auction, for instance, furries bid for back rubs.
1750.
And other
Back
pet
rubs.
services.
The motives that are involved in many different areas would tend to be a little bit controversial.
that's the kind of
I
shit
don't
you
really
see in the fucking sleep paralysis terror.
And the furry strip.
That was like ICP gone somehow even more wrong.
As far back as 1994, local news outlets were beginning to write pieces on them. The March 1994 edition of Wired magazine wrote about those furries who used mucks.
Ew.
Quote, "Take furry muck, for instance, the first anthropomorphic mud. It makes Lambda Moo look like the young Republicans. People describe themselves as furry, cuddly animals. More times than not, they have furry, cuddly animal sex." Unquote. Apparently, enough support was shown to her that Trotman penned a second piece, which she titled A Modest Proposal, borrowing the title from Jonathan Swift's satirical essay. This writing, published on her personal website, reads so. Quote, "Okay, so by now we all know I can complain, but I've always been a fan of the fix it or shut up philosophy. Below is a small proposal as to how. Furry fandom is an embarrassment. There's no getting around that, but that doesn't mean it's beyond repair. There was a time when the designation furry didn't double for zoophile, plushophile, psychopath, or naturist. It used to be fun, and people used to know exactly where you stood when you referred to yourself as a furry. But these days, people hate being called as much.
In the corner with the other degenerates.
Yeah,
Together with
pretty much.
platoons of perverts who have decided to set up base camp under the guise of furrydom. A lot of cool people have dropped out of furriness altogether, rather than be associated with or pressured by these nutballs. I still miss Abe Groder. Agony, agony. I wrote this page as a response to the massive influx of support for the Furry Manifesto. Maybe there's hope for us after all. Furriness needs fixing, and I think I may have an idea. It's not enough to distance ourselves from the previously mentioned drooling maniacs. Even if, by some miracle, the masses rose up and managed to expel every last wacko from the fanbase, the name furry has taken on connotations it will likely never shake. Common sense decrees a secession is in order. A subset needs forming, a group of furry types who want to make their interests known without being associated with the twitching crack babies in their crates.
It was burn for shit.
Oh yeah, we getting into my favorite era of furry right here.
Firm grasp on reality would clearly feel slighted by the screamingly deviant direction the fandom has taken. Another way of looking at it is the example made of furs who have spoken up against fandom perversion and been burned at the stake for it. Eric Bloomrich is the best example. There are others, of course. Once the manifesto is posted
That
to all
almost sounds familiar.
Right?
This plan was quickly enacted. The burned furs established themselves on message boards as a loose coalition of furries. They had the support of many prominent members of the community who were both personally frustrated by
Did you move or
about
something?
its public image.
Okay,
However,
there we go.
even with the positive momentum behind them, they would begin to face trouble almost immediately.
You don't say. An organized group of furries facing trouble.
Trotman's proposal attracted many who were concerned about the state of the furry fandom, but their goals were ill-defined. New members would join who defined degeneracy differently
Yeah,
from Trotman.
what a
The
shock.
point of greatest concern
Furries with
was that
illy defined goals.
sexualization of furries was a reprehensible activity, and there was a sentiment that artists who did so were violating their artistic integrity. This was in spite of the official Burned Fur website stating that they were not against furry pornography or sexual role-playing. Since the movement was so decentralized and their founding texts so
Just
vague,
listen to this and see
anybody,
if you can draw
including these
any,
new members,
like,
could speak for
comparisons
the group, and they came to be associated with
to what's going on today.
anti-homosexuality and prudishness. Even so, their influence would be felt in the core of the fandom. In 1999, Mark Merlino gave control of Conference to a man named Daryl Exline, who made himself known as a Burned Fur shortly after taking possession of the convention. Many online furries were skeptical about the convention's future. Despite the mixed reception of the Burned Furs, other prominent furries began to join and offer their support, and one of the most publicly visible was a man named Eric Bloomrich, the same person mentioned in Trotman's A Modest Proposal. Bloomrich would quickly become known as one of the most vocal members of the Burned Furs
life in
and a critic
fandom.
of the furry fandom. His stance had been well known for some time before the Burned Furs were created, but compared to Trotman, his vision for the fandom was much more restrictive and directed. On October 30th, 2000, he made a statement on a furry Usenet board that would come to be associated with him in the fandom. Though he opens by stating that the writing was his alone, he quickly abandons this in his piece and invokes the entirety of the Burned Furs. It reads in part, quote,
Well, of course he
I
does.
warned that if the world at large should encounter our fandom through these elements, the fandom would be irreparably damaged, tainted as a haven for the sexually degenerate. I warned that the proliferation of pornography depicted to the world a fandom aberrant and despicable. Squeerat's manifesto led to the formation of a core group with no ideology, no cohesive
God, the way this guy
other than the common
types.
desire to bring about a
Oh,
change
dude,
in
it gets
fandom.
worse.
We didn't go far enough.
It's not wrong or incorrect, but it reminds me of a certain type of person.
Restricted as they were to the internet and a few cons, were unable to
The honorable villain.
thin veil that separated our tainted fandom from public.
Yeah, that or their inverse, the honorable good.
Kevin Duane, proudly
Good boy.
displaying his filth to the prying cameras of Comedy Central. Well, in the wake of recent events, it is clear that this will not do. We must acknowledge our bully pulpit and take on the forces that would destroy our fandom by name. We must have the courage to mount the ivory tower, accept the uncomfortable mantle of authority, and state unequivocally our accusations against these foul abuses for human beings. These people need to be exposed for what they are. They must be hounded, persecuted, and driven back into the maggot-ridden depths from which they emerged. Until they are, we cannot hope to make any progress toward the rehabilitation of the fandom they so gleefully and selfishly destroyed.
Woo, my
He then
dude.
goes down a list of people, but the first was Mark Merlino, one of the founders of Conference. Quote, I accuse Mark Merlino, who masterminded the debacle that was Conference 3, advertised almost exclusively through gay and lesbian resources. The man who came up with the egregiously vile decision to give every confirmed member of Furry Muck a free pass to the con. He goes on to indict other individuals for creating and selling pornography.
Vile
One
decision.
paying $4 to the dollar, and accusing another of selling
Egregiously
pornography
vile
to children.
decision.
His last targets, which he called the most despicable of all, were those members of the fandom who hadn't spoken on the subject. He closed by comparing himself to Martin Luther King and John Raba, while calling Mark Merlino a demon. The reaction from the furry Usenet board was aggressive and negative. Bloomrich was immediately attacked for his
Doug Winger.
misunderstanding of the sexual nature
Of course Doug Winger had a problem with
called out
that.
for his hypocrisy. Merlino's partner, Rod O'Reilly, would later defend Merlino.
Right off the bat.
So that.
We might as well get into it because people are going to think about it. But people started noticing. Lo and behold, hey, guess what? There are LGBT people showing up at our furry convention, and there are certain people.
You don't say, sweetheart.
Panic. Because what are these LGBT people doing at our perfectly heterosexual fandom? And we're like, what? But, and then they're like, we see, you gay guys invited all of these weirdos in. You wrote them letters all personally and said, hey, come to our convention and make it perverted. They're like, oh.
By 2001, few, if any, people identified with the movement anymore, pushed out by the rest of the community.
You
While
don't
numerous
say.
people in the furry fandom
Yeah, what a
still
shock.
had their concerns, the Burned Furs nor any copycat group would have the same sort of sway they did. However, new technology and services were about to irrevocably change the fandom in a way that would have made it nearly impossible for
Oh
the
my
Burned
god.
Furs to achieve
We'll
their
get into
aims,
that.
and perhaps
No, we
even
have to.
necessary.
We
In the
have
early
to.
2000s, the internet was seeing rapid expansion in terms of accessibility and speed. Personal computers were gaining increased storage capacity and processing power, and scanning technology was becoming more detailed and widely available. These factors together would see a widespread increase in internet usage and digital image creation. Users could now also share images.
Holy shit, that icon.
with one another.
Yeah.
Furry artists would begin to use it frequently for this purpose. Digital artistic tools quickly found even more widespread usage among furries as well, being an ideal form of art for the internet. This process was expedited by image hosting websites being created and made available for free. The earliest was DeviantArt, which launched on August 7, 2000 and shifted to hosting art in 2002. DeviantArt was a powerful tool for amateur artists at the time. As
Wow, it hadn't been around that long when I started using it.
Since
Right?
more and more furries were using the internet to coordinate and communicate, DeviantArt proved to be an ideal choice for them. However, there was one important limiting factor for the furry community. DeviantArt would allow nudity, but not pornography. Around that same time, another private project called YifStar was being created to replace the old image archive used to house furry artwork. The word Yif meaning anthropomorphic sex.
That autistic
furry.
orca looking shit.
This website would act similarly to DeviantArt, but specifically for furry artwork and with
Oh,
no
yeah.
restrictions. Soon after, other image hosting sites based around anthropomorphic artwork would appear, such as Sheezy Art in 2003 and Fur Affinity in 2005, the latter growing to be one of the largest
I like how they're using the modern icon for
Due to
FA.
the popularity
Right?
of DeviantArt, however, many furries would continue to use the platform, sometimes in concert with other platforms. Eventually, furries became so prolific on the site that in 2006, a specific category for anthropomorphic artwork was created, establishing furries as a core demographic of the platform. Due to the new ubiquity of the internet, more and more furries were accessing both these new online resources as well as old ones, such as Furcadia. The increased connectivity of the internet was also making it possible for furries to communicate, advertise, and organize new conventions easier. Smaller conventions that had
Midwest
started in
Fur
the 90s and
Fest.
early 2000s began growing at an exponential rate, with new conventions appearing in numerous cities across North America. Despite the success of these new conventions, or perhaps because of it, conference would very abruptly begin to decline even before ownership of the convention was passed to Daryl Exline. In 1998, the official attendance count was approximately 1,250, but the following year, it dipped by nearly a third to 850. After the board of directors announced a change of venue, another convention was set up to take its place in the area, and by 2003, attendance was just below 500, less than half of where it was only 5
And yet
years
MFM
prior.
is still
At this
going.
point, the
How?
convention was closed. But even with the closure of conference,
Well, isn't conference going on still in a new form?
to be a powerful mechanism for furry artists
I
make
would have
money
to look
from
into
their art,
that to
being able to
say
take
one way or the
commissions
other.
much more easily and deliver them digitally. They could now draw directly for interested
I
clients
like that.
without having to attend conventions, though they still would prove a powerful method for artists to increase their popularity. These pieces of art would then often be uploaded on image hosting sites such as DeviantArt and Fur Affinity, allowing the artist to grow an easily visible, public body of work. Creating furry personas, or fursonas, grew ever more popular on these sites.
Silver
as well,
Denny!
since it was
Oh
so
my
easy to
gosh,
share
it's
them with one
Denny.
another, with the creators often commissioning or creating art depicting this furry version of themselves interacting with other personas as a surrogate or an avatar. At this point, the furry community began to decentralize more and more, encouraged by the structure of the internet. Different websites and small groups began to form around artists, styles, and interests, including pornographic and non-pornographic material, while image hosting sites made it
I like
easy
that he
for
showed
users to
Ink Bunny
filter
in
out
the
the sort of content they were
non-pornographic,
seeking from
like,
their ever-growing databases. Where the furry fandom used to be a more unified entity based
It
on
started
online
off
message
as
boards
a
and conventions,
less
now people can seek out
terrible
independent
substitute
furry
for
material
FA, at least the way they tried to play it.
itself. Over time,
God, that
furry
sparkle
costuming
dog.
or fursuiting grew ever more
Hey!
refined, with craftspeople
Oh, it's our
offering
favorite
suits for
person.
sale and shipping them worldwide. Artists would expand from the traditional cartoonish style
More
and develop their
cocodope.
own, frequently borrowing styles from others within the fandom.
Yeah, it's
Even
Sobe
so,
down there.
The influence of anime and Disney is still often
Looks like
visible.
Sobe.
Today,
Yeah,
the furry
probably
community
is.
is scattered and splintered, subdivided into smaller sections both on the internet and in real life. These groups continue
I've used
to
that
grow
second tab more times than I'd like to
specific,
admit.
organized by interests ranging from
Tutorials?
political affiliations,
No.
styles, to sexual
The
fetishes,
fetish
and they
selection.
continue to
I know.
subdivide.
I was
Regional
trying
furry
to give you an
conventions are
out.
common, each with their own
Oh,
rules
no.
and restrictions
Oh, no.
on art and conduct.
I don't
Even
need
the
one.
definition of furry appears to mean something different to every person who claims the moniker.
The one
To
punch
some,
flag
it
is the
means
first thing I
actively
see.
taking part in a community of other people with
You mean the
interesting
One Piece?
anthropomorphic animals, while
Yeah,
to others
yeah,
it
One
means
Piece,
only an
yeah.
enjoyment of such
One
media.
of them
No
anime
matter how
things, I don't
each
know.
person may define
I'm not
it,
alt-right, so I'm not that
is
familiar with anime.
furries are here to stay.
Oh, man.
That was solid. That was a pretty damn good rundown of the early days of the fandom, all the way up until like its
The way
Middays,
we
I
know
guess.
it now, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So, I guess first off, Josh, overall, what was your opinion on the video?
Overall, I have to say it was pretty fucking fair. It
I'm
focused.
glad you said that, but continue.
It focused a little heavily on the early years of the fandom, and I guess I might be biased since I am, 26 and not 56, but because it's important for anyone to, particularly furries themselves, to have an idea of what the fandom started as.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially from like the 80s onwards. Once we actually started having a community, if you will.
Well, and exactly how far back that community, so to speak, stretched.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I've noticed a lot of people seem to think that, oh, well, it started on the Mucks, obviously. No, dude. The Mucks came like 10 years after the community formed.
Well, I know people that don't think the furry fandom even was a thing of note prior to the 2000s. And by know people, I don't mean I know them, as in I'm friends with them. I'm aware of them because I've seen them around. I was going to say talking, but typing is a bit more accurate, and I kind of wished I had never seen what they typed because it was painful. It was painful to behold. So, yeah, the fact that this guy, presumably not a fur fag, but you never know with YouTube people these days,
right?
Presumably not a fur fag, has gone into great detail and accurate, like factually accurate. He's gone through the lengths of looking up archived shit to confirm what he's saying, or I suppose it'd be more accurate to say what he's reiterating.
Yeah.
So that to me gives me an overall really good impression of this video as a whole. It's not something I would show to somebody if they asked me what a furry was.
Well, and we'll get into that because... Anyway.
If they asked me what a furry was, I wouldn't lie to them, but I wouldn't tell them the whole truth. So,
a mundane, so to speak. Oh man. So,
what was? You asked me what my impression of the video overall was. What was yours?
A lot like you. I thought it was pretty fair. I thought it was more than fair. But one thing you have to realize about me, okay, and this is what I was saying, you know, I'm glad you brought up that it was fair in your opinion. I don't think that I hide the fact that I like shitting on the fandom, because there is some awful shit in this fandom. I know a lot of furries would look at this video and say, oh, well, he focused way too heavily on the sexual aspects and the
negatives.
The inclusion of the negative sexual connotations of the fandom. And no, he did not. The thing is, anytime that the sexual side was brought up, it was very indifferent, I guess. He did approach it with indifference, so to speak.
I will say this. He did focus on it. He focused on it a lot. And
well, how much of that though was him intentionally focusing on it, so much as it was that was the shit that was there in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, you know?
Both. It was both. If I'm going to be realistic here, Ed, because you could do a video about the furry fandom that was as long as that one was without touching heavily on the sexual aspects at all. However, I would call that a heavily biased piece if it were to happen.
Exactly.
This did have quite a bit of focus, though, on that. And that's what he does. He focuses on things that are usually controversial, or if not controversial, very much in the past and strange in and of themselves. Like the rat experiments. Yeah, that's not really controversial. It's just really fucked up, weird shit. But it's long since passed, etc., etc. It could have focused less on that sort of stuff, but that would have added at least 10 to 15 minutes worth of content, even if you just wanted to touch on it. And towards the second, well, not the second half, but like more like the last quarter of it, it touched on more recent stuff, and it focused primarily on the drama and shenanigans and very lewd nature of its origins, which is fair.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I would be remiss if I didn't comment on just how much it focused on it. And there, of course, every time it came up, I noticed it was typically mentioning quite a bit of conflict within the fandom itself. Over that.
I mean, the whole burned furs thing took up a good, third of the video almost?
At least a quarter.
Yeah, at least a quarter. You know,
I mean, from when they were specifically mentioned to when he stopped talking about them, it was less than that. But the figures introduced earlier in the vid that were a part of Burn Verse, that took up, a fifth of the video at least.
Funny story, I had a friend of mine recently, someone you don't know, mentioned to me, because I say recently, we were discussing the video last night, and he told me that I had made the joke that, you know, if I had been around like in the 90s and early 2000s when the burn first thing was really rocking, that I would probably at least be tangentially connected to it, you know?
Involved.
Yeah, tangentially involved.
Tangentially involved.
And sorry, I'm inebriated.
as you have to be to do one of these.
I cannot brain. I have a mild form of brain death. Oh, anyway, and he fired back with, "Haha, no, bitch, you'd probably be one of the figureheads."
Of course he did. Of course he did. No, you're a little too detached for that, but I don't know, maybe you back in those days would have been a little more involved. I don't know, but I know what you're saying. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Because in reality, that whole conflict within the fandom has never truly died down completely. It has changed. It has become more or less subdued over the years, but that fundamental underlying issue that was the burned furs and what spurred them on, and that whole conflict in the fandom has never gone away.
Well, and I think it was there far before the burned furs.
Yeah.
The burned furs were kind of a head, so to speak, of the conflict. You know, and I agree, it never has quite gone away. Look at all the people slinging shit at you know, guys like Zouch, guys like Wildlife. You know, the people who are confirmed pedophiles and dog fuckers and everything. There's still a significant pushback against those people. Granted, maybe not as large of a pushback as I personally would like, but there still is a subsect of the fandom that pushes back against this shit. Same with the burned furs, though. There is still a large subsect of the fandom that supports those people. You know, so that's, like you said, that conflict never really went away. It's just kind of taken different forms.
Yeah. I mean, and you look at that guy who was a devoutly involved burn fur, and his, how did you describe his rhetoric? When I pointed out the way he was typing reminded me.
The self-righteous villain. Or the morally guided villain, or whatever I had said.
And I said he reminds me a little bit of, you know, the wannabe crusader type.
Yeah. Not the cat.
Yeah, exactly. He gave me that vibe, which I guess nowadays both pretty much fall into the same category, and I guess that was true back then, because listening to the way he was typing up a storm against these other individuals, it's like, okay, so that is who you have as a powerful figurehead of this burned fur movement. Well, it's no wonder it doesn't gain the I guess weight behind it that you would like, and it's no wonder that people were ostracized for being a part of it, like the sort of person that has like a burn fur icon on their profile. If somebody's introduction to the burn furs are that diatribe that one motherfucker wrote up, then their perception of somebody that's got something like that on their profile is probably going to be rather negative.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, though. Reading what he wrote in contrast to what Squeerat, the founding member of the Burn Furs, had written, if Squirrat had remained the central figurehead of the Burned Furs, do you think it might have gotten further than it did? I mean, obviously it never would have accomplished the goal that it set out to accomplish, but I think that guys like that, especially in comparison to people like Squirrat, who was saying, you know, dude, have your porn, but stop fucking your dog, you know. I think that steering kind of away from that direction into a puritanical direction kind of kneecapped it.
Oh, I wouldn't disagree. I think it would have been significantly more successful? No, I actually don't. Even with somebody less puritanical and more level-headed, I don't. But I don't think it would have been an abysmal failure to the extent that it actually was, had somebody, like I said, you know, less puritanical, more level-headed, been at the reins of the carriage.
Yeah. From what I've seen in various discussions regarding the Burned Furs and, you know, how that whole thing played out and how they're received today, which is largely impacted by the way they ended. You know, every movement is viewed in history from the way it ended. Occupy Wall Street started out as a legitimate protest. Today it is remembered as fucking rape tents and ketchup talking on TV.
It's also remembered by people on the far left as a great movement that was put down by the man.
Okay, so Burned Furs, largely defined by the way it ended. A lot of people talk about that movement the same way that I see people talking about alt-furry today.
Yeah.
Which brings some hilarious comparisons when you think about it. Alt-furry not necessarily fighting against the porn and degeneracy, because let's face it, they are balls deep in that shit themselves.
Alt-furry as a movement has some of the most degenerate motherfuckers in the fandom. It's entirely possible that the Burned Furs did too.
I'm sure. He who, the more he spoke of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons. So, but they're fighting, puritanically, so to speak, against the 2017-2018 quote-unquote scourge, the leftist movement that has seeped into the fandom. You know, whereas the Burned Furs were facing the problem of the degenerates, or what they saw as the degenerates, so is alt-furry. They're going against what they see as the degenerates, and they are doing it in a very puritanical and hilarious manner.
It is that they are similar in the sense that you are talking about the more socially conservative aspect of the fandom fighting the more socially quote-unquote liberal aspect of the fandom in both cases. Where they divulge entirely is how politicized it is this time around. And I think honestly maybe not bigger in terms of the percentage of the fandom that it affects, but much bigger in terms of the number of people it affects, because the fandom has grown so much, and the politicization of the fandom is on another level, a level that it wouldn't even have been able to imagine back then. And the polarization of the country as a whole, the U.S., because that's like where most of the fandom is stationed, is nowhere near the point that it was at in the 80s or pretty much any other decade since then.
Well, and look at the way social media has evolved from the era of the burned furs to the era of the alt furry. You know, like, it's a lot easier to because let's be real, a lot of this shit happens on platforms like Twitter and such. You know, where it's easy to type off a quick attack and send it out, whereas things like the Furry Manifesto were well thought out, very long-winded, which not necessarily a bad thing because you get to elaborate on your thoughts and points. You know, with things like Twitter, you've got 280 now characters. You know, you can't explain shit in 280 characters. So, you know, that I think that does play a large role in the way these quote-unquote battles are fought as well, you know.
Well, the attention span of the participant in modern days is dramatically reduced. If they don't hook you within the first 180 characters, or 280, I suppose, then you're not going to read the rest of the thread. Whereas before, you were a little bit more invested, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if the headline didn't catch your attention, you probably weren't going to click on it. But there was few enough of them floating around that you probably would anyways, because maybe this doesn't sound like something you are interested in, doesn't sound like something you like, but hey, it's furry related and it's pretty strongly worded. Let me see what this is about. Maybe you get like 3 paragraphs in and you're like, no, this is way too fucking retarded. This is like 5th grade reading level and I'm at 8th grade to at least.
This guy sounds like he's competing with Emperor Palpatine for control of the furry universe.
Right? The nigga really did. It was almost comical. But
he did remind me of a comic book villain, the way that he phrased things. It was hilarious. But I looking back on the whole burned furs thing, I can't really help but draw a comparison between that and the way the whole alt furry, leftist furry thing is going these days.
Yeah, because it would be unfair to sit here and compare it to nothing but the alt furs, because it does also smack of the equally as politicized and partisan side of it with the leftist furs and the Antifa furs.
Yeah.
So absolutely both. But
well, and the oh, let's just get our fucking podcast flagged. I mean, let's be real here. A lot of the same people who are the hardcore lefty furs are probably the same people who would cheer on the dudes deep-throating each other in the convention space to squick the normies.
Yeah, actually. And I will clarify that you said a lot of, and not most of or all of, but, you know, a lot is a very spongy value, but I think even, you know, one would be a lot because it's too many. But you are correct. The sides there with that conflict and their correlation to the, I guess, sides today are blatantly obvious, like to anybody who is a furry now.
Yeah.
And has been involved for at least a year or two.
The Venn diagram would only be vaguely oval shaped. But yeah, so I thought that particular section and the way that it was discussed was actually pretty interesting. Because throughout the entire video, like even from the start, there was a lot of things brought up that were applicable to the fandom today. You know, especially with the, I guess, safe haven aspect of the fandom being LGBT friendly, which, you know, I have no fucking problem with that. You know, fucking, dude, do it.
You and I both.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
but I think what a lot of the earlier people were discussing was the shift, in their eyes at least, of it being about fans of, and this is, I guess, more along the lines of what I was saying when we paused the video. There was almost a visible shift from it being a fandom of people who liked the anthropomorphic animal aspect, the funny animal aspect of the fandom, which, you know, obviously that's what it's built around. An almost visible shift from it being centered around that to it being centered around it being a safe haven for the LGBT community.
Well, there was some of that, and a lot of it was talking about cons. How cons have become kind of a mecca, if you will, for sexually invested people within the fandom, most of which who are LGBT. And that could be because the fandom does attract a shitload of LGBT people. And there's more to unbox there, but this is not the time for it. And if you're talking about LGBT people, you're talking about a group of people that probably in their day-to-day life don't have the same available opportunities to indulge in their sexual interests the same as a heterosexual person.
Yeah, I can agree to that.
So a fandom meet-up, a convention or something full of people like them that are not only homosexual, bisexual, what have you, but also into, like, you know, animalified people. It's not surprising to me that it became like I said again, a mecca for that. But there was clearly some issue with that early on. I don't think we still have the same issue. Nobody is bitching about how there's too many gay people at FWA or
exactly
or Anthicon, but
I mean these days it's a given. Like, oh yeah, no, there's gay people here. Yeah, of fucking course there are. Get over it. You know.
Yeah, most of them are like big.
Which,
big...
I mean, realistically, is my fucking thoughts on it. You know, like, okay, as long as they're fucking fur fags, I don't really care.
And that's the thing. That has changed because clearly that was a problem for some people back then, and I'm not surprised. But there is still the matter of degeneracy.
Wait, you mean a fandom that was founded on the back of
bullets?
Shut up. You mean a fandom that was founded on the back of comics and art styles that attracted people who were into that sexually to the point that it became a
money-making enterprise for some.
Yeah. I guess to put it more succinctly, you mean a fandom that was built on the back of comics that pandered to degenerates attracted other degenerates? I never could have seen that coming.
But that battle is still waging. There's still plenty of people that go to these furry cons that are LGBT themselves who are like, wow, okay, this is some bullshit. This is taking it way too far.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be walking around in this. You shouldn't be walking around in that. Then you have the other side that's like, well, fuck it, man. Just let them do what they want to do. It's not hurting anybody. And then there's the counter arguments like, yeah, sure, they can do it in their bedroom, but not out at the lobby floor. And then you have people that are like, well, I don't care what they're doing in their bedroom. It's still fucking degenerate, and I don't want them around, etc., etc.
And realistically, those are the types that I think you and I would have the most problem with.
Yeah, but
not to put words in your mouth, but yeah, that's a very interesting discussion that's going on within the fandom of today.
And it was present back then. It's shifted a little bit. Like I said, it's no longer people bitching about there being too many LGBT folk. Well, there are some of them, but they're almost all Christian, and I don't really care about their opinions.
Says the proud atheist.
I am not atheist, thank you very much. I just don't believe in Harry Potter any more than I believe in the fucking Bible. So,
let's be real, they're the same book, just pandered to different audiences.
Well, at least Harry Potter had a somewhat likable protagonist. I mean, magic is a lot more of an interesting occupation than carpentry, if we're going to be real. Although I bet Jesus would have been a hell of a wizard in the Harry Potter universe. He would have been on like Dumbledore levels.
Rename this podcast "How to Make the Alt-Furs Hate Us."
No, like Jesus could have taken Dumbledore's sorry ass and made him straight. So.
Oh. Let's be real. That was retconned.
That was so retconned. There's literally nothing even remotely gay about Dumbledore in the books and the movies that came out after the books, after she had plenty of time to be like, this nigga is gay. Like, you got that, right? No. But I digress.
Yeah, that's a tangent. But
just waiting to happen. The shit that he highlights there, the shit that the fandom is going through at those times, it's not the same, but it still exists in a different variant, if you will.
Yeah.
A different mutation, a permeation of it, rather. And that's kind of eerie. I knew the fandom had a reputation for that shit back in the day, particularly the early 90s and, well, all of the 90s, honestly, and the late 80s as well, which makes sense because that's kind of when the conventions really got their start. But it is amusing to me how the very first furry convention initially branded itself as essentially a furry room party.
We all know what those are.
Yes. Yes.
And if you don't, I got some bad news for you.
Be careful which ones you're invited to that you decide to attend. Let's put it that way.
Even I have made that mistake. There's, I want to say, a surprising amount of crossover between the shit that was going on in the 80s and 90s with the stuff going on today. But really, when you sit and think about it, it's not that surprising at all. You know, because it's a new generation of the same people in a lot of regards.
Exactly, and to be fair, it has gotten so much better now. If you consider where we're at now in regards to the shit fest the fandom was in then, progress, we are doing so much better than we were in the 90s or even like early the 80s, the 90s in particular, and even the early 2000s. We are doing leagues better. If we were 2,000 leagues below the sea before, we're at least at periscope depth now. But the nature of the issues that we're having have changed only slightly, and with the addition of the political. But with that analogy I just made, if you are the sort of person who, and there are plenty of them still left, look at where the fandom was at back then, and you look at the side arguing for the more tolerant, acceptance-based approach for what was back then bad, then you might look at today's fandom and think the Burn Furs have won, the boy bands have won,
man,
etc., etc. And you know what? If you think that, then fine. I just disagree with you violently. But there's plenty of people in this fandom right now who absolutely agree with you. They are going to look at the video that you and I just watched, Ed, and they're going to think, you know, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of that shit, but the whole, like, prostitution sale thing, yeah, that was fucking great. Like, what the hell is the problem with that? There's going to be people who watch this who are like, oh, okay, yeah, I now I understand why Kage is such an authoritarian prick. And they're gonna say, and he's still completely in the fucking wrong, because what he was fighting against back then was totally fucking relevant, and the shit that we've got going on today is even more relevant, you know? Like,
well, yeah, you start to understand guys like Kage and, I hate to say this, to the Ranting Griffin a little bit better when you realize that was...
Because I know you hate that guy too, or at least dislike him.
Oh, he is...
But you get why they are the way they are.
Exactly, because that was the era of the fandom that they came up with. That was the, I guess, hot topic of their furry formation, so to speak. You know, whereas
it's like they grew up in a time where Rainforest wasn't the exception; it was just a slight deviation of the standard.
Exactly. You know, I had made the joke that at the very first furry convention there were 2 fursuiters, and one of them was in latex fetish gear. Ergo, literally 50% of the fursuiters were in fetish gear. You know, yeah, it's a joke, but it's also the fucking truth. You know.
Exactly. And there is still the debate raging right now about fetish gear.
Particularly the puppy play stuff.
And in public, it's no longer a fashion show parade style show off the fursuits. There's so fucking many of them, you couldn't possibly do that. They just hurdle you into these lines like cattle and march you around in fursuit parades now because there's so many of you.
That take 40 fucking minutes to complete. From start to end, you know?
R.I.P. the hero at Anthrocon 2015 who tailed up the very back end in nothing but jeans, a t-shirt, and a horse mask. One of them floppy latex horse masks. That man is a beautiful person. But
all these great fursuits and then that.
Yeah, this nigga just like, move! Yeah, I'm her. Like, you have to have a handler to get in. Like, what fursuiter are you with? I am the fursuiter. Is that allowed?
But these
we don't have any conditions.
You know, but going back to that though, these are the same. Fursuit parades. Some of them, they count the puppy play masks as a fursuit. And whether or not you agree with that, that's still a thing that's happening. That's fetish gear, and it's being accepted as part of the fandom.
Well, it's not being accepted as part of the fandom yet. There is a fight going on over it, and I have seen people take either side that surprised me that they were taking the side they did. I don't know how you feel about it, Ed. I personally am not entirely sure. I just know that because you look at those early fursuit videos, the one where there's two of them.
Yeah,
that was like a panel. That was in a fucking panel,
Yeah.
Unless somebody walks out in the fucking dude, I don't really care what happens in panels as long as they are sealed off and only 18 plus or 21 plus, and the requirement is you have to actually have a convention badge to get in, and an ID that tells you the person the legal fucking age, which is more than we have for voting in some states, but hey.
Ooh, you filthy right-winger.
Is that right-wing? No? Oh no. Common sense is right-wing? Fuck. When did that change? Must have been like in the 90s. I'm just really saucy today. It's changed from that being a subject, a topic, that people are kind of like, I don't know about that. Did you see that, like, female Bambi-looking ass motherfucker in her skimpy like bondage attire, that dominatrix-looking attire? That's pretty raunchy. That's pretty inappropriate.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it was. But now we're talking about the same shit. And again, like we were joking about, if you count the harnesses, which I won't, because I know most of the fursuiters that have those harnesses don't use them for any kind of adult anything. They're just an aesthetic thing. It's still weird, but whatever. Hey. But the full adult play, fetish oriented material, like my favorite dude at Midwest Fur Fest. I see them every year, and I'll give them this before anyone thinks I'm shitting on them, or before they actually hear this by some miracle of God. At Midwest Fur Fest, I have seen them every fucking year, and it's always been like after 11:30 to midnight. I only see them like post midnight. It is a dude with like a deer fursuit head. Usually has some of those like glow stick little thin ones you can make into braces and shit like that around his neck or his antlers, and the rest of him, aside from his hooves, is just like a full body one piece latex thing, and he's got the harnesses, the chest harness, all that shit, and he's just waltzing around the fucking lobby. You know, I've seen him going up and down the elevators before, often by himself.
You don't.
Because if I'm a guest and I don't know what a furry is, and I fucking open the elevator door and that's standing there, I'm just gonna be like, click, 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 click. Make them close faster.
Exactly.
And that's what we're having a discussion.
That's something that I think kind of gets lost, even though it's almost a meme amongst con-goers at this point. The non-furry, I guess, population that attends various functions at the hotel at the same time the convention is going on,
is present at the con.
Yeah.
And staying at the hotel or visiting the hotel or the area around it is still subject to all of your autism and the autism of the person next to you.
You know, like, and I have seen parents with their kids, their young children, at conventions checking in and going to their room covering their kids' eyes. You know, whether or not you think that's right, that's, you know, on you.
Well, it's obviously very right, because it's right-wing, because they're Nazis for not letting their kids see grown men parade around in nothing but boxers.
But that's what I'm saying. You know, these are the people. A lot of the same people are, you know, you need to take into account other people's life experiences. You need to, you know, respect others' viewpoints. But then they turn around and get pissed off when someone doesn't want their kids seeing that. You know, they get offended when the parent covers the kid's eyes.
I don't think they necessarily get offended, but they are completely fucking indifferent and seemingly unaware, or at the very least uncaring of the...
I'll give you that one.
Yeah, of the damage that does, not necessarily to the fucking kid, because honestly, I don't think that kid's going to grow up having nightmares about a dude in a deer costume for the rest of his life, but hell, I don't know. But what it does do is damage the reputation of the fandom that they have put so much into and are clearly fucking invested in. Yeah. Because, again, there's a dude with a custom-made fucking fursuit head that probably cost just under $1,000. So I know you're pretty involved in this fandom. I know you care about it. And some of these people they just don't fucking care. Like, so what if they were fucking offended? Like, LOL, get over it, faggot.
Yeah, pretty much.
You do realize this fandom is filled with hundreds of thousands of people who might have to deal with the repercussions of your actions. In terms of dealing with people.
Being a prime example of that.
Which is something I wish this video had... Well, part of me wishes he had. Part of me is glad he didn't, because it was already filled with enough negativity.
Point something out to you that I don't know if you noticed. He touched on the guy that went on... what was it? The Daily Show or something? It was one of the Comedy Central shows. Kevin Duane, I believe his name was. Or Kevin Durant. Anyway, this guy went on...
Durant.
Yeah, this guy went on national television in, like, the 90s, early 2000s. I forget exactly when. But it was early enough for this for the burned furs to cite him as an example of the degeneracy. I didn't know about this guy before, but he touched on that guy very briefly. No mention of Chew Fox, no mention of things like the CSI episode, no mention of fandom.
Tyra Banks' strategically placed holes.
Yeah, well, that's the Chew Fox thing. But there was a lot more that he could have gone into on that same vein, and for whatever reason chose not to.
He didn't because everyone else already has.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of it was he kind of cut things off, like the in-depth stuff, around the 2005, early 2000s mark, you know.
Around the time that FA kicked off and the fandom had a bit of a boom was...
Which is where a lot of the quote-unquote historical videos pick up.
Exactly. Yeah, like it's pretty clear that he's tailored his video to feature content that wasn't going to be featured on shit people have already seen before. Both furries and non-furries who just like to have a bit of a laugh at fur faggotry.
Yeah.
So that's something I do have to give him credit for, because that's low-hanging, easy fruit. You know, it's been done a million times. If I have to hear another fur fag or normie alike go over the bullshit of Tyra Banks, I think I'm gonna be sick. Or the CSI episode, god damn. That gets cited so often, it comes up in videos that aren't even about furries.
Oh, man. So, yeah, like you, I'll give him all the credit in the world for avoiding those particular topics. I just thought it was an interesting choice, you know. Personally, I'm going to chalk that up to the time period where he cut off his video. And I'm sure that if he had gone up until today, they would have probably been brought up, because he did talk about the media representation around that time, you know, but the time frame in which he was actually talking about, and clarify that, you know, he did bring up the media attention that it got at that point in time. So,
I mean, if he had gone into the same amount of detail that he had with the 90s in particular and the early 2000s past 2006 or so, he could have added another 30 minutes at the least of equally relevant content.
Yeah.
But he would have then been looking at an hour and 15-minute long episode, which he normally does not do. But hell, he just did one called Furries, and there could easily be a Furries Part 2. He's done plenty Part 2s.
Oh yeah.
Before, so it would probably take people getting into contact with him, like, hey, so there's a whole bunch of other weird shit.
But yeah, so I don't know. I personally thought it was a pretty good, you know, representation of the early fandom, the origins especially. I was very, very impressed with like I said, the amount of detail that went into the seeds that were planted that formed the fandom. Not necessarily the quote-unquote furry fandom itself, but where it actually spawned out of. You know?
The shit that predated it, that, like you said, seeded it. The proto-fandom, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. You know.
Because let's be real, that's something that not only do most normies not know, most fucking furries don't know about that shit. Like, he went back even further than I'm aware of.
Oh, yeah. You know, like, he technically, if you wanted to nitpick, started pre-World War II in the 30s and shit, you know. So, the dude definitely did his research. From what I can tell, it was solid research. So, you got anything else?
To add on the video, not in particular. I guess just to reiterate what I said previously, it's like he did focus a lot on the drama in the fandom and a lot of the negative aspects. It wouldn't have hurt to talk about the fundraising and, you know, the fundraising that didn't have a bunch of negativity attached to it.
Prostitution options.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
I can feel that.
And he did showcase a lot of good artwork as well, which was good. You know, there's plenty of videos that literally showcase only the worst that the fandom has to offer, and Lord knows there's plenty of that. But it was good to see somebody showcasing who's not a furry themselves that's trying to paint the fandom in a better light and be like, oh, look at all the clean fur stuff. You know, I'm a clean fur myself. I don't like all that dirty porn. Never mind that strangely named folder, Steve Jobs. You just don't click that. Yeah. It was refreshing. However, I would like a part 2 to it. But we'll see where that... Given how broad of a topic he just tried to tackle with this, I would think it is actually very plausible that there will be a second part, and if there is, I would love to watch it with you as well. If there's not, though, then I have to say this is one of the better videos, if not one of the best videos about the fandom done by a non-fur fag that I can think of, bar none.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So, anyway, that I think we're gonna bring this to a close. Because it's 3 a.m. here. We've been talking for almost 3 hours, and I am tired as fuck. So,
that sounds fair.
From the two of us here at BrainDeath, I wish you all a great night, and seriously, check out the video. Frederick Knudsen, Down the Rabbit Hole Furries. It is a...
Link in the description.
Link in the description. Like and subscribe. We don't make any money off this, but we'd like to pretend to.
Remember to hit the bell icon. Because that does a thing, apparently.
Yeah, well, I was going to make a YouTube shooting joke, but deplatformed. Y'all have
it doesn't matter, they're already all dead, so.
Y'all have a good fucking night.
Sweet dreams, don't let the fur fags bite.
Turn off that pesky ad block. 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 Turn off that pesky